We're thrilled to be hosting this webinar on the disruption that's taking place in the healthcare and insurance industries and the innovations, technologies, the business developments, especially as COVID has accelerated digital transformation across sectors and also particularly pushed to the forefront the need to digitize the healthcare industry. It's great to have with us a number of panelists from different areas in the industry, and I'll introduce them. Ladies first, with Lana Ghanem, the Managing Director of Hikmah Ventures. Hikmah, the large global pharmaceuticals business based out of Jordan. And they've been investing a lot, mostly outside the region. We'll hear from Lana more why, but active investor in the healthcare sector. We have with us Dr. Mussaad Al-Razouki, the Chief Business Development Officer of the Kuwait Life Sciences Company, which is also an investor and develops joint ventures in the life sciences space. And Dr. Saif Al-Aljabeji, who is the co-founder and chairman of Sehteq, which is a rapidly growing InsurTech company. Great to have you all with us. And we're going to dive right in. And I want to start really with thinking about consumer behavior, right? The biggest thing that's shifted in the recent period, whether driven by technology and of course by COVID, is consumer behavior. And people are doubly scared to go into hospitals because of the extra risks, and there's just a heightened alertness and change in behavior. Where do you see which parts of the healthcare value chain are being transformed? Which of them have flourished in this, and what kind of changes in behavior have we noticed? And maybe we'll start with ladies first as well. Lana, how are you seeing the change in behavior in this sector and the parts of the value chain that are really flourishing or transforming?
Sure, Omar. Thanks for having me, first of all. I think, COVID has definitely expedited the growth of digital health startups. And I think there was a lot of skepticism around digital health startups, digital therapeutics, generally from consumers or patients, as well as regulatory bodies, and everyone in the value chain. However, I think, as you rightly mentioned, right now this is becoming the new norm. Virtual care is going to become the new norm. We are seeing a lot of traction in companies in the telemedicine space, remote patient monitoring, at-home diagnostics. So people are generally valuing the convenience of less face-to-face interaction, and they're actually now inviting these smart devices to their homes and are more willing to share their data with companies. So I think there is a shift in the mindsets of patients and doctors alike. And in terms of if you look at the value chain as a pharma company, I see a lot of disruption already happening when it comes to sales and marketing. The way our medical reps and sales reps speak and communicate with doctors. You no longer need to go to the doctor's clinic to detail them about a certain product. Now you can do that virtually. So that's becoming more of the norm. And in addition to this, I think as a pharma company, we're transitioning to becoming more patient-centric. We want to be closer to the patient. So that was one of the reasons why we established Hikmah Ventures. It's to basically plant seeds in areas that we are currently not in, especially in the digital space, and to partner and co-develop companion apps that could work with our drugs, because then we're a drug manufacturer. So we're aiming to co-develop these platforms to be closer to the patient and make sure that they're adhering to taking their medication, because that's one of the largest problems. I think, the statistics globally is, I think, over 70% of patients usually don't adhere to taking their medication. So when it comes to chronic diseases, that's a really serious problem that we're trying to tackle. And when it comes to hospitals on the other end, we're seeing a lot of them invest and co-develop platforms with virtual care startups. So again, especially in the West, you get penalized if patients are readmitted to the hospital. They're trying to reduce hospitalization, reduce the length of stay. So we actually made an investment in a company based out of Canada that's tackling this, so that patients can conveniently be remotely monitored after surgery or after conducting or undergoing an operation from the comfort of their homes, and they can easily communicate with the care provider or the doctor. So I think to summarize it, I know I talked about so many different things. I would say it's sales and marketing, becoming more patient-centric, and generally, as patients, we're all patients at the end of the day. I think there's a shift in mindset to more convenience and really adopting these platforms ranging from telemedicine to pharma delivery.
Thanks. And thinking also about how much people are not, the trust barrier that has kind of fallen when consumers are now willing to use these services and also share their data, which I think is really one of the big barriers historically in this industry. Dr. Mussaad, what kind of trends are you seeing in addition to or different from what Lana mentioned, in terms of consumer behavior and in terms of the value chain?
Sure. في البداية بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you, Omar and Arabnet, for inviting us and for being part of this panel. I definitely agree with Lana that there has been a seismic shift in terms of the patient's perception of what is available for both diagnostics as well as therapeutics. However, I think really 2020 has been the year of prevention. And that can be something as very simple as wearing a mask. So there's been a huge boom in the industry known as PPE, which is personal protective equipment. Alhamdulillah, even before this coronavirus pandemic, we actually owned a PPE company, a very small one here in Kuwait, and it was barely breaking even on a yearly basis. And this year, alhamdulillah, we've had 700% increase in sales. So definitely, we can see that this is a huge part of the prevention. Obviously, the other big side of the prevention equation, at least when it comes to coronavirus, is the vaccine. And the US has invested $10 billion through its Warp Speed program. 8 different companies have accessed that huge fund. Obviously, there are huge endeavors ongoing in Europe and in China as well. And the last I counted, I think there's about definitely over 150 different companies and labs working on coming out with a vaccine. And for maybe those of you who aren't really following this on a day-to-day basis and are wondering why we don't have a vaccine yet, remember, the fastest we as a human civilization have actually generated the vaccine was back in 1961 when we created the mumps vaccine. And that took 4 years. That was the fastest we had ever developed a vaccine in history. Typically, to generate a vaccine, you're talking about research over at least, a couple of, 4 to 5 to maybe even 10 years. Thankfully, because of the emergency, let's say, the emergency discretion provided by many regulators, hopefully we'll have a vaccine as soon as April or May of next year. So that's a big part of, I think, what is really shifting at least the focus of Big Pharma, which is a big player in the healthcare industry. And we see also insurers now trying to work closely with regulators to figure out who will pay for these drugs. And, let's say that now, any news on a preventative healthcare improvement actually impacts the entire economy. So we really see healthcare leading this sort of recovery or economic recovery. And thankfully, that is also translated here in the region. And we see Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain even hosting clinical trials for either the Russian or Chinese companies and government institutions who are working on a vaccine. So alhamdulillah, the Middle East, I think, does have a seat at the table, not only from a purchasing perspective, but also from the research perspective, which has been very, very, I think, refreshing. On a global scale, Omar, what really surprised me, and thinking back now, I think this is extremely logical, let's say, is the rise of mental health, mental health digital health companies, if you would, or telemedicine companies. I read the statistic about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where the US alone has funded 55 different new mental health startups, in total have raised over $500 million. So I think that speaks a lot to some of the challenges we are facing as a human society now, whether it's loneliness in the West, not being able to go out and interact with our friends here in the Middle East. Certainly, it's called social distancing, but at the end of the day, we spend more time on social media, which also has a psychological impact as well. Unfortunately, that hasn't really translated here in the region. I think we'll get into that a bit later. But that really surprised me about how now we are starting as again, human society to take mental health a bit more seriously. And, as a former doctor, I can tell you that the mind is as vital, if not more vital, than any of our other organs. So certainly it requires its own specialty and it requires its own attention. And the stigma that we have specifically here in the Middle East, I think it definitely needs to be challenged, and the digital health is a great way for solving for that.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mussaad. Saif, maybe we'll take a little different spin with you because you're sitting on the insurer side of things. How are you seeing changes in terms of user behavior, and where are the areas within the insurance industry are you seeing disruption? Where in the insurance value chain?
Shukran, Omar. Well, obviously, this is a health pandemic. It's a health issue, but it has an economic impact. Health insurance may be one of the few sectors that have seen both of those impacts. So I'll start with what's positive. We've seen a surge in our sales. So now more people want to buy insurance, more companies want to buy health insurance. At the same time, we've seen a bit of shift for individuals and companies to buy better insurance than what they had, especially if they had a bad experience, like they had insurance, but it didn't cover them through the pandemic, whether that's for testing or for treatment. That's what was positive. There was a gap of about maybe 6-8 weeks of lockdown where it became almost a mandatory shift to use telemedicine. Again, as an insurance company, we've looked at this as an opportunity to accelerate the deployment, the launch, the adoption of virtual care. Now, what I would say sounds a little bit negative, but it was unfortunate that the majority of players who were available in the market were not up to the game. The experience that many individuals had with the virtual care was not up to the mark. And I think it's primarily because the launch was immediate. There were no much, I would say, checks and balances of what's being offered. And that have reduced the cost of care. So when you look at, we call it the claims. So what we get in terms of utilization or claims was less. However, that was almost balanced with the cost of COVID. So in the UAE, it was very much regulated. We didn't have a say on it, where whoever tested positive had to be admitted. They initially started being admitted to a hospital, but the light cases were admitted in a hotel. So some companies had to find creative ways of having our own kind of like a hospital hotel setup. What I see now going forward is happening as the economic impact is hitting more, I'd say, the businesses, especially the SME segment. So there is a bit of a cash flow issue, and that have created, I would say, more dynamic, more innovative ways of how do you reduce your cost, how do you reduce cost to the clients, and how do you come up with a solution for clients to, for example, have something like a flexi benefit. So companies can continue to buy insurance, but not necessarily spend the same amount of money. So myself as an employer, I can, buy you the basic coverage, and then you go upgrade if you want to cover your family. So there is, and I think we'll continue to have a lot to do between insurance, health, and healthcare. But in health insurance, I would tell you that the market have changed tremendously in the past 3-4 months. And we are almost like in the future of insurance.
And I hear that in every industry today, that rapid acceleration in digitization that we're seeing. And so I want to maybe take a step back now and think, imagine the future a little bit. Try to think about these technologies that have a lot of promise, and which ones you really think are a lot of hype, which ones you think are something that we're going to see real adoption of in the future. So of course, we've heard a lot about things like 3D printing for organs and tissues. We've heard about artificial intelligence for diagnostics, personalized medicine, IoT and wearables. This is a huge one, the quantified self, augmented and virtual reality for things like remote and telemedicine, remote surgery, drones for things like site inspections of sites and things like this for insurance, robotics, blockchain. I mean, I'm curious to hear from you, of all of those technologies that I mentioned or others, what do you think are going to be the most impactful for the industry? Which ones are being integrated right now? And which ones you think are hype and they're not going to come to fruition as easily? And we're going to also ask this question to our audience. We're going to ask it in a poll. So if you want to open the poll now, team, you can tick multiple answers to this. And I hope it works out. Yes, what technologies do you believe will be most transformative for the healthcare and InsurTech industries? We put most of the technologies that I just mentioned. You can pick more than one. We're gonna get, I guess, a little chart that's gonna tell us what the audience thinks. So go ahead, please, and vote, and we'll continue the conversation, and we'll present the insights from our audience just after. So let's flip this around. Saif, let's start with you. Maybe we tackle a little bit of insurance, that different perspective. We continue with that. What of these technologies do you think are going to be the most transformative? Go ahead.
Sure. So again, what accelerated technologies and the adoption of technology at our end was the lockdown. So we're a bit privileged as an InsurTech, or as a technology-driven insurance company. We spend so much money on technology. So when we suddenly, almost I'd say suddenly, we had to start working remotely and continue to service our members, whatever investment we've done in technology paid off. So we had, a couple of vendor-driven solutions that help us, whether with automation or working remotely, or as you call it, process robotics and process automation, that pays off. What I think out of the few in my industry is AI. So we have an AI-powered pricing engine where you can talk to almost like, it's not about it. When you buy insurance, you could have more transparency in the options of your age, gender, through maybe thousands of different pricing combinations, but the AI would push that in fractions of seconds. So you will only see a couple of options that are relevant to you. Now, I think you will see more of that now, because the model of buying insurance through an agent, that's how it still is working, or used to be, had to forcefully stop for a couple of months. So people didn't have, except, you talk to someone over the phone, or you go through a portal. And if you go through a portal, you cannot understand all this fine print. So there has to be some technology that help you as a customer and help me as an insurance company to sell for you. And I think AI would continue to lead when it comes to that component. I'll leave it to my co-panels to talk about from a healthcare standpoint, because there is so much cool technology happening.
Great. So what I heard from you is today integrated robotics and process automation, artificial intelligence. What about, let's say, like 10 years in the future, 15 years in the future? Which one do you think is going to be the most transformative of all the technologies? And we'll ask also all of the rest of our panelists the same.
I think AI, and I'm talking about insurance.
Okay, great. Lana, let's go to you. Technologies that you're seeing of these cutting edge being adopted right now, and the technology that you think is going to be most transformative in the kind of medium to long term.
Sure. I mean, it's easy to say AI and machine learning because that's basically integrated in a lot of the startups that we're seeing, or at least many of them. But I think we're seeing a lot of activity, and what actually gives us an indication on how the future is going to evolve or unfold is the mega mergers that are happening, or the consolidation that's happening in the sector. So you've seen in the States that Teladoc and Livongo merged. So it's basically a combination of telemedicine and chronic disease management, or digital therapeutics. So I see I'm personally very bullish on both the telemedicine space and digital therapeutic space, and I think we're going to see a lot of mega mergers and consolidation as we go along. And I think going back to Dr. Mussaad's point about mental health, this is an area that's really gaining a lot of traction. We've within our portfolio companies. We have, one portfolio company called Winterlight Labs based out of Canada. They work on vocal biomarkers. And what they do is they measure the acoustics and linguistics of patients who take, certain medications for Alzheimer's and dementia. So they work with pharma companies and they monitor them, week by week, and they can tell from, the way they talk, the way they, say their phrases, etc., and words, whether the medication is working or not. These are the kinds of technologies that we're going to see a lot of traction in. Where, again, things like continuous glucose monitoring, again, when it comes to chronic diseases, is another one. We currently globally don't have a painless, low-cost, device out there that can continuously monitor glucose, ketones, other biomarkers. So I think, platforms that are, targeting number one, chronic diseases, as well as, other diseases like oncology, are going to gain a lot of momentum. But all of them have...
We have so many chronic problems now, right?
Yeah.
We live a long time and we have a lot of chronic problems. But one thing I'm hearing from you, which I think is interesting, and you said it before, as a company that is a pharmaceutical, instead of thinking about your drug as a product, you're thinking about it more like a service with a companion app, with a system. And I think that's a really interesting change in perspective. Maybe this is something you guys have been doing for a long time, but for me, at least, it's the first time I'm seeing that kind of a change in language to this as a service almost. Yep. Dr. Mussaad, I'm going to jump to you on this question. What technologies do you think are most transformative, and which technologies do you see being applied right now?
Well, Omar, I think it's a tough question, and you compiled an excellent list of buzzwords, Silicon Valley buzzwords, which have also found their way into MENA. But, if we take a step back and we look at...
Lana didn't answer any of my buzzwords. She talked about...
I will give you...
Which is great. I thought she gave a really insightful answer that was, much more deeper than mine. But go ahead, Dr. Mussaad.
I will give you a direct answer, inshallah, after just giving you a little bit of context, especially for our viewers who might not be familiar with the healthcare industry. But if we go back to the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, or even the 1980s, not much has changed in healthcare compared to the banking industry, compared to even, God forbid, the airline industry, one of the most terrible industries in the world, like, let's say from a consumer perspective. Hatta the airlines are doing a better job, whether it's using let's say simulations to train their pilots, whether it's booking online, whether it's even customer engagement. I think they're doing a much better job than the traditional healthcare providers. Now, that is the cautiously, let's say, optimistic or pessimistic side of it. But the good news is that it means it's a fantastic opportunity for entrepreneurs who want to really invest in a new industry. And in healthcare, we need entrepreneurs who have various different backgrounds. Now, in terms of technology, unfortunately, today, many of these buzzwords are only buzzwords in healthcare. Now, we want to be at least a bit optimistic and encouraging to entrepreneurs to really explore applying IoT or applying AI. But frankly speaking, today in the Middle East, just having a better service company, a company with, let's say, high levels of consumer service, that would be good enough to really create an impact in the market. Now, one particular piece of technology, which I believe will be a game changer and is already in many ways, it's not on your list because it's more of it's a healthcare or life sciences type of technology, but it's known as CRISPRs, which is a gene editing type of technology. And actually last week, Jennifer Doudna and her partner were awarded the Chemistry Nobel Prize. And this technology has been around since about 2016 when it first made headlines. And really, this is a game changer because now, to use a technology term, we can cut and paste DNA. And this goes back again to the central tenet of medicine, which is to prevent disease in the first place. And that to me is going to be the game changer. So rather than actually having somebody succumb to a chronic disease, inshallah, one day very soon, we can actually go into the person's genome, edit those genes, and hopefully they will lead a much healthier lifestyle. So certainly that to me is the technology with a huge potential. Today, believe it or not, there are two companies that are listed. We were an investor in one, Editas, which listed 2 years ago. There's another great company called CRISPR Therapeutics, also listed. Both these stocks over the past 3 years have almost doubled. Some have even tripled. And certainly this is and we're just scratching the surface now. So even from from a therapeutic perspective, this doesn't exist yet. Most of these companies have just been supporting the research and development of this new technology. But if I had to pick the most disruptive technology in the next 10, 15 years in healthcare, it's going to be this promise finally of gene editing.
Promise, and I guess also there that we could say a lot of ethical questions and concerns about, at the end of the day, how such technology could and should be used, right? There's a lot of specters that this raises in the thoughts of humans about what desirable and undesirable qualities in people and children, and but I can definitely see how this is going to be an incredibly powerful technology. I hope we will put in place the ethical boundaries needed to manage this kind of technology. AI in many ways, I think, is another technology that needs tremendous amount of ethical controls in order for it to be really, serve humanity as opposed to the other way around. Team, if you could pull up just our answers from our audience to see what our audience thought about the questions. AI gets top scores with 90% voting for AI. Second is data, which is actually closely tied to AI, IoT, and then a smattering of other answers for the others. AR and VR are one of the least, which is interesting because we have seen a lot of AR and VR in telemedicine. Lana, what do you think of the audience's answer on there? Do you disagree with them?
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. I think we're seeing a lot of companies pop up in the space, but I guess the hardware element makes it harder for them to scale, and it's really hard to differentiate and find the unique selling proposition for each one of them. But there's no doubt that there are companies in the space, and it means that that there is something happening there.
Okay, great. So I'm going to move on to our next question, which is really challenges that are slowing down the growth of this sector. Challenges that are slowing down digital transformation in this industry. And again, here we have a number of options, and I'm going to put next time other so that we can populate other answers as well. But some of the things I put are general challenges for digital transformation, which are: is it around consumer behavior and trust, investors and funding? Is it idea not good enough? Yes, we don't have good enough innovation. R&D could be part of this as well if you think about it in that bucket. Leadership, vision, or culture. People are afraid of change. Mature and skilled founders, right? Founders who have the technical expertise maybe needed to invest or to start businesses in the healthcare industry. Talent and skills. I think that's a big one in many sectors. And regulation. So we'd love to hear, and maybe we'll start with Dr. Mussaad on this one. And audience, please feel free to vote for the challenge.
So not to skew the audience in any way, but well, I'll make it a bit deeper actually, because unfortunately in the MENA region today, the regulators are also the largest providers of healthcare. So if you look at the traditional healthcare system, or what's called a patient-focused healthcare system, you have the patient here in the middle, or the population, because we also want to encourage prevention. So you don't really want to only look at sick people, you want to look at the population overall. But then you have the regulator, the providers of healthcare, which are mostly what people think of healthcare, the hospitals and the clinics and so on and so forth. You have then the suppliers, which is where Lana works, the companies that distribute the drugs, the medical equipment, so on and so forth, both manufacture and distribute. And you have also the final one, the insurance sector, or the payer sector, which is where Dr. Saif works. So today, unfortunately, I feel that the regulators, given that they are also the largest providers of care, are not really adopting or encouraging the use of these new technologies. The United States, which is one of the most advanced economies in the world, up until even today, about 70% of all providers, so clinics and hospitals, demonstrate what's known as meaningful use. And so this was a federal law in 2007 in the United States, encouraged by the federal government. In a way, it encourages doctors and clinics and hospitals to be somewhat digitized, but they can't say digitized in the law, so they just called it to demonstrate meaningful use of the data or of the medical records of the patient. Without getting into too much detail, that really then created a huge boom and a huge investment boom in digital healthcare. Today, you would not have Teladoc, you would not have Livongo, you would not have a huge number of US healthcare, digital healthcare companies like GoHealth or GoodRx or any of these new insurance tech companies like Oscar Health without this new meaningful use law. So today there is really no incentive or even no stick for any of the providers or the any really big or small providers, whether hospitals or clinics, to really adopt digital healthcare, right? And even if we look at telemedicine, for example, we have 3 or 4, well-funded telemedicine startups here in the region, but I know for a fact that they are struggling because today, I don't know what a 15-minute telemedicine consultation costs, or is reimbursed at. However, in the United States, it was very clearly stated by the Center for the CMS United States, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, that a 50-minute telemedicine consultation costs $42 and will be reimbursed by the US federal government for $42. That was over 10 years ago. And the insurance industry then followed suit and then started also reimbursing telemedicine, which is why I had this huge boom. And that continues until today. And in many ways has prepared the US for this pandemic, which is I think, a great silver lining. Today, the equivalent does not exist here in the region. So we definitely need the regulators to be a bit more, first of all, to let go of being providers as well. I think that you cannot be the referee and the player in an industry. And this is something just for myself as a free market economist who has graduated from Columbia University, maybe a bit skewed.
Of course, one of the challenges where the government is in many places regulator, operator, enabler simultaneously. But just to kind of to reconfirm what you were saying, we're talking about the regulator both aligning incentives and setting standards, and kind of putting together any needed processes. So kind of at least paving the way for these players. I want to move on to Lana on this. What do you think is the biggest challenge?
I mean, unfortunately, the option, all of the above, wasn't there. So I had to pick one. But I mean, just going through them, one by one quickly, I think, consumer behavior and trust, yes, it is a challenge. And that's a global challenge because as I mentioned previously, COVID expedited the growth and adoption of these tools and, made people more comfortable and actually forced them to use it. It's becoming more of a necessity than a nice to have. So I think this is, slowly but surely changing. But that's one thing, because at the end of the day, you have to sell your products to consumers, and if they're not buying in, there are a lot of B2C companies out there. If they're not buying it or they don't believe in it, then it's a problem. But that's changing, so I'm optimistic about that. In terms of investor funding, I think actually the problem is that there is plenty of money going around, especially in our region. There are many funds out there that have a certain time horizon to deploy their funds, and unfortunately, this is in a way not negatively affecting the ecosystem because they're basically submitting very unreasonable term sheets with very high valuations that might actually hamper the growth of these companies in subsequent rounds when they're not able to
deal inflation.
Deal inflation, exactly. So that's one. So it's a problem because there is plenty of money going around, not because there is lack of it or scarce, or that money is scarce. In terms of innovative ideas, unfortunately, in the region, there is a lot of kind of looking at models that worked in the West and kind of trying to mimic that or replicate that in a region, which there's nothing wrong with that because they're catering to a different audience, different demographic, different regulatory system. So when it comes to innovative ideas, you do find a lot of ideas in the West being kind of transferred here, and I'm a big fan of that because they are tackling a different demographic. However, I'm highly doubtful that we'll see an an originator kind of or a company that comes up with a very original idea pop out of the region. I hope I'm wrong, but maybe that could happen. In terms of leadership vision, that's one thing that I guess, as being an employee at Hikmah, and being on the innovative side of the business, it's something that we struggled with when we first set up the fund. We were kind of the wackos, or like the crazy people who are investing in these companies. But I think now, after 5 years, we have many champions in different departments. We I think have done a good job in educating our colleagues about solutions beyond the pill. And to your point, Omar, we want to transition from becoming a drug manufacturer to becoming a healthcare solutions provider. So that's kind of helping.
You put it so much better than I put it.
And I think we're lucky because we have a very progressive executive team and board that allowed us to launch the fund and establish the fund and invest in these technologies. So leadership vision is extremely important. In terms of maturity and skilled founders, I think, to be honest, there are skilled founders and mature founders here, but there aren't that many, right? I think, from our interaction with different founders and startups, the thing that I hope will change is for them not to go with the term sheet or the investor that bids the highest or submits the highest valuation, but to actually go for smart money as well, and look at what this investor can actually add to the cap table, to the board discussions as a partner. So I think I hope that these founders mature in terms of really picking and choosing their investors, because there is plenty of money going around, so they really need to be picky and choose the right people. And in terms of talent and skills,
I wanted you to pick one, but I think we got a good sense of where you answered all of the above. So I think that's very clear now. But I do want to give a chance also for Saif to give us his thoughts on this in terms of where you think are the biggest challenges.
Well, I'll try to be politically correct, but I would say regulation.
Why be politically correct? No one's watching.
No. I mean, we have been working in an industry which is highly complex and heavily regulated. Insurance is between banking, so I go through the same regulatory framework like banks and financial institutions, but because we are health insurance, so we also go through the Ministry of Health and Department of Health. I need at least, I would say, in a good day, 4 to 5 regulators to operate in one market. So for us, scale means we would have to tweak the model. And again, I'm saying we're very lucky to be technology driven, so tweaking the model is easier, but there are so many regulations. And I'll zoom a little bit out of insurance and give you a good example. When we had the lockdown, the regulator eased the licensing of telemedicine. So anyone can be a telemedicine provider. In fact, we've used a couple of telemedicine providers. We didn't like them. And I said, I talked to the CTO and said, can we be a telemedicine provider? And he said, yeah, of course. So we shifted in weeks from using vendors to building our own and launching a telemedicine. And that tells you how much the regulator could help in this access or transition. Because just by making it easier for telemedicine providers to operate, you moved from having 1 or 2 options into having so many options, including even the telecom company started providing telemedicine. Which obviously, I mean, that was a bit too much because we ended up with too many, what I would call the Mickey Mouse companies. Is like, you get a standard technology from a technology house in India, you just have a couple of doctors and now you are a telemedicine provider. Putting so much pressure on an established business that have the right licenses, their data is hosted in the country, the doctors are in the country. But it's, for my co-panelists and the audience, that was a life example, a life hack, as my kids would call it, how suddenly we have so many telemedicine providers and maybe thousands of users. I was talking to some of the usual suspect, the players in the telemedicine, who said, we were suddenly from a couple of calls into hundreds of calls. We are hiring doctors, we are pumping more money into the business. So I think if I would to choose in our region, as it's kind of like a top-down approach, the regulator can play a fantastic role by expanding the reach, empowering the innovation, or doing the complete opposite. We had earlier some discussion about fintech and how it's have picked up because of the help the regulatory bodies in the region, across the region, are doing. And I hope in the future we'll see more and more cross maybe regional ties, cross licensing or things that would help scale or bring investment, expertise, models from developed worlds. If we can slightly look at the region instead of a smaller, I would say, cities or countries, into maybe a GCC-wide approach or in a couple of countries in terms of, again, regulation.
Great, thank you, Saif. And I'm going to stick with you because I think you gave me a great transition to my next question, which is about why is it that we've seen other industries like banking move so quickly, and the banks themselves become such an aggressive player in the innovation and tech space, but healthcare, we've seen those organizations move much more slowly. And just before that, I wanted to queue up the results of our poll and see what our audience thought the biggest challenge is facing. Regulation. Okay, regulation. So definitely a lot of people think regulation. A close second is consumer behavior, which I think it's interesting that even with all the shift that we've seen in COVID, our audience still believes that consumer behavior is a, are you taking a photo of it? I love that, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then the third one I think that has showed up here with a good traction is talent and skills. So about having the talent and skills needed to build businesses in this industry. Awesome, so maybe we will jump right there and to the idea of why aren't we seeing more hospitals in the tech space? Why aren't we seeing more pharma companies? Why aren't we seeing more of these players, not just delivering, digitized services but I'm talking about being part of the innovation ecosystem, setting up funds, being more involved in sourcing innovation. And we'll start with you, Saif, since you mentioned you've been seeing the banking industry moving a lot faster. What's holding back the healthcare industry?
I'm going to use a bit of stats numbers, and those are not mine, but the banking industry spends about 8% of their P&L on technology. That's why many of us haven't visited a bank, and I don't think we will ever visit a bank.
What percent, did you say?
8%.
8%.
The insurance, and I cannot comment much about healthcare, I bet it's lower, but the insurance industry spend 3%. So for us, and I'm talking again from an insurance standpoint, if you want to be like banking, we have to double up what we invest. And now, I'll tell you what we do at Sehteq. We spend 40%.
Wow.
So the unfair advantage we have, when I speak to my friends at the big boys league at the big insurance company, I say, of course you are not like that, because we spend all of our money in technology. And those guys are still spending 3%. So for like developing any application would be on the bottom of the list that in every budget review, they'll go scratch it. And I would tell you the same as we work with providers, healthcare providers, those hospitals that we expect them to innovate. And they have the same. If there is a regulatory mandate or a payer, which is an insurance, a payer provider kind of integration, they consider a couple of hours of IT development as a huge cost. Like, why would we build it? Why don't we just hire another guy? So unless there will be a serious money going into technology and innovation, you wouldn't see it. Or open up, and I think that's what I've seen many of the pharma companies like what Hikmah is doing. If you don't want to do it yourself, you just set up a fund to invest in startups that are actually innovating or disrupting that model, and you can help them, guide them, or eventually acquire the ones that do something out of this world. So instead of you spend on your R&D, you can spend that part of that money in a way cheaper, working with the startups. And now I see a lot of the multinational pharma. I haven't seen much of the hospitals in our region, but at least the pharma, they all have different form of acceleration programs, mentorship. And I think the idea of it is to spend little money in accessing those nice application ideas, innovation.
But even with that, Hikmah is maybe one of the only entities that I know in this space in the Middle East. And Lana was just saying that a lot of people thought you guys were crazy when you were starting. So Tell us what, and I'm sure that people are still thinking that this is, many traditional businesses are still thinking that you guys are crazy. So what is it that you've seen in talking to other businesses in your domain that they say, you know what, we don't believe in this? Or what made you believe in it, that you thought this is really important for us?
I think for us, I was seeing that a lot of corporates, especially in pharma, establishing VC funds within their entities, and for them, like if you look at the Pfizer's, GSK's, they're all originators. They're not generic companies, so they establish it to tap into external R&D. So basically to invest in new chemical entities most of the time. They obviously also invest in digital technologies, but for us, as a generic player, we wanted to establish a fund to tap into, as Dr. Saif mentioned, into external innovation, but when it comes to digital solutions, because we want to invest in platforms that could supplement our own business model, that could enable us to better differentiate our products. So, being the largest regional players, we feel like, it's part of our responsibility to invest in such technologies and couple them with the drugs that we're currently selling. And by the way, it's not just platforms and apps where we, for example, introduced our injectables team to a company called Aricor based out of the UK that's working on technologies that can expedite the development of certain drugs, of 505(b)(2)s. So they're now working on 2 products that are ready to administer, and they should, commercialize them hopefully within the next 2 to 3 years. So I feel like we're slowly making that difference. Where if we're not partnering with these companies, although we do have 2 projects in the pipeline with 2 of our portfolio companies, we're basically acting as an ideas window to the different departments at Hikmah, because as a corporate VC, we use and abuse Hikmah's resources, ranging from the legal team to the R&D, sales and marketing, and BD. And with that, we expose them to what's out there and to all of these solutions. And it's up to them to come to us and tell us, what, yes, I think, we can use this platform and couple it with the products that we're selling, but we can't force anything on them.
Clear. Dr. Mussaad, do you expect to see more healthcare companies get involved in this space, given that they're a little bit late already to the game? And in what kinds of formats do you think are going to get involved? Is it going to be through, as Saif and Lana were talking about, an investment vehicle, or are you seeing an interest in different kinds of models for sourcing that kind of innovation and getting involved in the startup space?
No, I really think that, we will see the innovator's dilemma, right? Which means that innovation is most likely to come not from the incumbents, not from the large companies, but from many, hopefully, inshallah, of the entrepreneurs watching us today. At the end of the day, healthcare is extremely lethargic. Really, hasn't been innovative as much as other industries, so there's plenty of room of opportunity. And again, to be a bit more optimistic about the future, today, if you look at just the GCC, we're talking about $100 billion industry. If you talk about just GCC healthcare, which is still growing at 18, as high as 18% compound annual growth rate. So I really I challenge anybody to find an industry as big, growing at as a fast rate, and really with a huge opportunity to be disrupted. Today, I think a lot of the incumbents, they've done well in creating Health 1.0. It's up to the new generation now to come up with Health 2.0 solutions. And the good news is we've seen a huge number of these companies, whether in the UAE or at least in Saudi Arabia, becoming public. So they become now more accountable to the public domain and to more investors than just 1 or 2 families. And that in of itself will create a huge institutional shift and will allow hopefully new ideas to flourish within these companies. And again, it's up to the regulators to foster a competitive spirit within the industry, the same way you have huge competition in the banking sector and the telco sector. At least the telco sector used to be traditionally highly dominated by the public sector, and now has become more of a private enterprise. The same can be said of the regional airline industry, where we have some of the best airlines in the world, which are also government run, but we also have a lot of smaller, more nimble and innovative private airline companies here in the region. So So certainly, I do believe that the private sector will hopefully take charge and lead this new innovative wave. And I'm betting on the smaller companies, the smaller startups. Hopefully, we'll see that the larger companies will at least co-opt them and allow them access into their channels. But I do believe that it is, let's say, the innovator's dilemma, and that it is the innovator's dilemma, and that we will see innovation come out from the non-traditional players.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing that we're almost out of time. I do have a last question that I wanted to ask, which is a bit more of a kind of a fun question, which is, tell us about a startup that you think in your sector, healthcare, InsurTech, that you think is really cool that people haven't really heard about, whether regional or whether global, and what does this startup tell us about an interesting trend that's going on in the sector? So, and Mussaad, you shook your head with conviction. You have one in mind already.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people have heard about it already, but it's a company I'm personally invested in. It's called Metahealth, which is a femtech company. And it was a company that was founded in 2016 by...
Femtech?
Femtech, yes. So this is a new buzzword for you, Omar.
I love it. I love it. I've heard it, but I wanted to make sure that that's what you were saying. Femtech. Okay, can you explain to our audience Femtech?
So Femtech, again, it's nothing new, but like many things in life, women make most of the decisions and the correct decisions, and it's no different in healthcare. So when it comes to at least the healthcare of the family. And so Femtech really, it's an industry that has really, in of itself, expanded, I think, exponentially around the globe. Back in 2016, before this buzzword, I think, really started to come about in 2018, you had maybe globally 10, 15 companies working on this space. An early pioneer of this is a company called Progeny, which listed about 2 years ago in the United States. A friend of mine from Colombia had also invested early on in this company, as long as M Ventures, part of the Merck family and the Merck pharmaceutical company. But today there's dozens of these female healthcare, or let's say women's healthcare focused technology companies. The industry by 2021, according to some reports, is expected to have at least $50 billion. And so certainly, again, plenty of opportunity there. In the Middle East, again, the number of female-focused healthcare startups, I think, are less than the number of fingers on my hand. So definitely, I think it's a promising space. Women in this region, are not given their fair share, and even globally when it comes to whether it's research into their healthcare needs or even just different diagnostic or treatment options. And there's certainly a huge potential. So that would be, let's say, my local pick. I think globally, and it also does apply regionally, and there's another buzzword for you, Omar, that I learned today, just this afternoon.
Just for me.
Yeah, well, it's not for you, it's for the entire It's actually a very catchy buzzword, and it makes a lot of sense. Silver tech is the buzzword. And we use silver here as a synonym for the elderly population, which traditionally here in the Middle East, we've had very young populations. But today, as our populations are aging, we need to come up with new solutions for the geriatric or the elder portion of the population to face what's known as the silver tsunami. So this huge wave of people who are retiring and leaving the workforce and still need their healthcare to be taken care of, and because people are living longer and longer. So I think that's more of a global issue at the moment because our population is still a bit young, but definitely I think it's something that at least for us at KLSC, we're looking at very attentively.
I love that. Very clear, very well said. Saif, let's take your stab at it, and we'll end with Lana.
Well, I think there is a company called Dakadu. It's a Swiss startup. What they have nice, and I worked a lot with them on their product. Their product takes your holistic health and translates it into a number. It has a gamification and engagement component out of it. So every day that number would change based on your mental health, how many hours you've slept, if you are following, let's say, the guided coaching which is AI powered. I've tried to translate that into insurance. So then that's called Health Score. And then that health score translates into your insurance premium. So the good the better you do, your health score will improve, which means my cost will reduce. And also it builds a digital engagement. So I know you're talking to me every day. One of the problems we have in insurance, our customers only talk to us when they are in bad shape or they need us or they want to yell at someone. but this would create another way of engagement. I don't think it have this. This is a cool startup or a cool idea. I think the founders are doing their level best to maybe commercialize it, use it into different industries. I think they've looked at rewards and incentives as part of that. And of course, there is a company that starts with the letter S.
And we wish you the best of luck with that. Lana, tell us your pick or picks for startups that should be on everyone's radar.
Sure. I mean, my picks are in the brain disease space. I already spoke about Winterlight Labs, which is in the vocal biomarker space. But and to add to the Dr. Mussaad's point about Silvertech, I think, we're witnessing, I mean, all of us know at least one person who has, Alzheimer's or dementia, unfortunately. And another company that we invested in this year, and is doing a great work is called Altoida. And what they do is they develop a platform or an app that doctors can use to diagnose people early, up to 94% accuracy before the onset of Alzheimer's. And I actually did that test. It's a 10-minute test. They did, they have a lot of clinical research and data to back, the platform. And I think, merging, the fact that they measure functionality and cognition with Winterlight's ability to manage, acoustics and linguistics, I think, that would create a giant in the brain disease space that could enable people to better diagnose and monitor diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, and schizophrenia.
Great. There's a question, what's the name of this startup? I think, Lana, that's for you.
So it's called Altoida, Altoida.
Great, great. What an interesting conversation with everybody. And I love the end with some real interesting opportunities for the entrepreneurs to focus on. Big opportunities around aging population, around women who are underserved everywhere. And we talked a lot about medicine as a service and customer centricity and customer engagement. And I think all of these are kind of really interesting insights. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Mussaad and Kuwait Life Sciences Company for collaborating with us on this. And looking forward to keeping in touch and seeing you again soon. And thank you for our audience for joining us today.
Thank you.